All right, cheers, Kira, whenever you're ready.
Thanks. All right, so my name is Kira. I'm going into my second year of undergrad, and I am the liaison officer for the Ability Co-op. So I um, talk to people who aren't internal. So that's why I'm doing this today. I am by no means the expert that Jack claims I am, but I am involved in disability advocacy on campus and nationally and international. So I'm going to start just by running through some general bits. So I'll ask Jack to kindly move the slide onto the next one. Thank you. So I'll do a quick visual description before I keep going. So there's a diverse group of people. Some look disabled, some don't. Cartoons on the screen. The writing says general, and the Ability Co-op logo is in the corner. And then I look feminine and I have short brown hair. So now I'm going to get into some of the information. None of the slides have a lot of information, so if you have any difficulties with technology or with visual impairments, don't stress. There's nothing important that's not in my voice. And if you have any issues with audio description, Zoom does not have audio descriptions, but this same training, different video, is posted on the Ability Co-op YouTube. So that has captioning. The first 5 minutes or so are done proper captioning, and then it's auto-generated from there. We haven't finished it yet. So what I'm going to do quickly is post that video in the chat. So if anyone struggles with um, with audio retention, you can use the captions there, or you can watch the video again later. All right, so that's the housekeeping done. So there are two main things that we're hoping to push for as you run your society events this year. Um, so we want to really emphasize this. So we want you to advertise what parts of your events are accessible and what parts aren't. So we won't shame you for advertising that an event is not wheelchair accessible, say, but it stops someone from making it to the door and having to turn around awkwardly. Or it stops someone from presuming it isn't accessible, so not going when actually it was accessible. So if you're telling people and just being transparent, this is accessible for this isn't accessible for this, etc. That's really, really helpful. And it saves a kind of embarrassment. It also saves time and it just includes people more honestly. And the other thing is to have an anonymous form previous to your event to request a reasonable accommodation. Um, so that just means that you know the kind of issues that might arise because I'm going to go through some really common types of disability and some kind of overall general terms, but disability is very broad. And just asking people what they need in an anonymous and respectful way is the best way to do it. So, yes. And then the philosophy that I want you to approach this with is what's one thing I can do to make my event more accessible? That's it. I don't need you to do like a whole revamp of everything has to be perfectly accessible because it's not possible. It's very complicated, it's bureaucratic, and it takes time and money. But if you just say, okay, let's run through this list of things that make an event accessible. Is it difficult to implement? Can I implement it easily? And then can I do one thing that's just a little bit harder to implement to try and include people? And then advertise it. Tell us, what are you doing? What are you not doing? Perfect. So now I'm going to move on to running through different types of disability and how they can be accommodated in society events and social media. So I will move on to, I think it's visual impairment first. Jack, I might ask you to. Amazing. Yeah, so visual impairment. So this is just a cartoon of an eye with the words visual impairment and the Ability Co-op logo in the corner. So that's part of what is ideal for visual impairment. So just saying it's called alternative text or alt text. Just saying what it looks like, so what your post looks like. It can be a very simple description. It does not have to be picture paints 1,000 words. I don't need to say that there are 5 eyelashes on this eye. Just it's a cartoon image of an eye. Um, And that just makes it so that people can understand it. If someone's using a screen reader, then it can read it out to them. Or if they're on a Zoom like this and they can't see the PowerPoint, that they can then understand what everyone else is seeing. The other thing I want to talk very briefly about is how to handle service dogs. And the answer is don't. They are working, they are concentrating. Do not distract them, do not talk to them, do not try and pet them. If they're relaxed and their owner is having a casual conversation, maybe it might be appropriate to say, "Can I pet your dog?" But for the most part, they are working, they are busy, and it's important to let them concentrate. You will know if it's a working dog based on a vest. So that's all I have for visual impairment. It's worth noting as I go through this that I am not an expert in this. This is not a concrete list. It would take me hours to go through everything, but these are just some key things to keep in mind as you're planning for the year. So I'll move on now to a hearing impairment. Thank you. Um, so this just has a cartoon of an ear, the words hearing impairment, and an Ability Co-op logo in the corner. So for a hearing impairment, what we prefer is Teams, Microsoft Teams over Zoom, because it automatically captions meetings. Zoom captions meetings, but only for the paid version. Um, Also, then if you're live streaming, you might want to consider live streaming on YouTube instead of Instagram, because YouTube will auto-generate captions, whereas Instagram won't. It's important to know as well that captioning is not just for people who are profoundly deaf. It can also involve auditory processing disorders, difficulty concentrating. A lot of neurodiversity with ADHD or autism, they might find it difficult to pay attention to all of the words, and captions can really help. So even if you don't think you have anyone who's profoundly deaf, it's important. And it's just general accessibility. Then the other thing you should know about hearing impairments is if you're planning an event in person that is relatively significant, I don't know exactly the bounds of what that means, but an ISL interpreter can be booked and paid for by Trinity for society events if you request it 2 weeks in advance. The way to do that is on a document that I'm going to send you in a second, but or at the end of the workshop. So you can just contact Trinity. They will 2 weeks in advance, so that's very important. And yeah, they will get you an ISL interpreter. And okay, so I'm going to move on then to the next section of disabilities. So I'm going to talk about neurodiversity. So on the screen, there's the words neurodiversity, including mental health, a cartoon of a brain, and a picture of a sunflower lanyard. So I'm just going to briefly talk about what that sunflower lanyard is. So it's a green lanyard with sunflowers on it. You might have seen people wearing it, you might not. It's originated in the UK, but it is recognized in Ireland. And what it is it's a display of a hidden disability. So that can include a variety of hidden disabilities. Most disabilities are hidden, that you can't see them. But what the sunflower lanyard does is it kind of requests a sort of patience. So it's just a way to say, if I'm not making eye contact with you, it's not that important. If I'm using a disabled toilet, please don't tell me I don't look disabled. It's just a way of saying that. Now, a lot of people with hidden disabilities don't wear a sunflower lanyard, but it is an option to wear it. And it's important to know what that means. If someone's trying to tell you, it's important to understand. Um, Yes. So neurodiversity then is any sort of difference in the way that your brain works. So you might have heard neurodiversity and just heard it related to autism and ADHD, and this tends to be how it's used, but it also means things like epilepsy or anxiety disorders, or OCD is a common one that's used in neurodiverse circles, as in it's commonly referred to as neurodiversity, but generally different people have different ideas of what neurodiversity is. So I'm taking the broadest definition, including mental health and epilepsy and other things like that, whereas some people will just include autism and ADHD. So it is worth knowing what people are talking about. So when they say neurodiversity, what do you mean? Um, So I'm going to go through a ton of different ways to help with this because this is super broad. Most of these things are really simple. A lot of them people do anyway. So a lot of places around Trinity have a respite space with dimmed lights, lower noise levels, and possibly fidget toys. Um, it's important to have one of those in your event. So Trinity, you can look up TCD Sense Map and you can direct people to the nearest respite room on that map. But also what you can do is just have outside as a respite space. So you might just say, you're welcome to come in and out between during the event because outside is quieter and it tends to act as a kind of respite space for people. But people need to be aware that it's actually okay to leave during the event. You might have different speakers and you might say, you might like encourage people to leave between speakers so you don't distract them. But something like that is actually quite important to point out. Um, the other thing is a wayfinding video is something that the disability service often do. So what you do is you stand at the camping aisle and then you hold up your phone and you video what you see as you walk to your like event space and usually speed it up a good few times. But what that just does is instead of following a map, which can be kind of disorientating, people can see, okay, so I turn right when I see that building. Okay, I see that building. And it's just so much easier, especially for the first month or so in Freshers Week and everything. It's quite intimidating and the campus is really big. So it's important to kind of know what you're looking for, especially if it's within a building. So you can show up these stairs, down here, da da da. Whereas on the Finder on the Trinity Live, it can be a bit difficult to navigate. Other thing is just name tags. Yeah. Um, you might have a kind of committee, and it might be nice if you have a social media to post a photo and a name and a role beforehand. So if someone's going, oh my God, I really need to talk to the equity officer, it's very clear who the equity officer is. Um, Also highlight how questions can be asked, which I've just realized that I have not done myself. So you can ask questions in the chat or after the session is done. And that's a key thing around like not everything is fully accessible. And that's okay. But if you're doing your best, that's the way to do it. And we don't want to paralyze you by it has to be accessible, you can't do anything. We just want you to know that the more you try, the more we appreciate it, and you're including disabled students in your space. And that's a really important thing to do. Um, let me just see roughly. Oh yeah, if you post a rough schedule, if you have a long event, maybe a day of events, just posting at this time we'll have lunch, at this time we'll do this. That sort of thing is really helpful. It helps people if they know they're going to be taking medication. Maybe if their medication is like based off when they eat food, if they know when lunch is, they'll know when they can take their medication, stuff like that. Um, but yeah, that's the kind of thing. The other thing is to not use sarcasm when you're speaking, if possible, or to highlight when you have that is sarcastic. Both are equally helpful. Um, just because people can take things literally and it ends up that certain people are excluded from communication. And the last thing I'm going to say about that is if you could share pictures of the same event but last year and then highlight what has changed. So you might show a picture of, I'm going to take a society event, so I might show a picture of a chamber in the GMB and a picture of a debate. And then I might say, this year the carpet has changed. I'm making this up. Um, and there's expected to be more people at the event. It's just an idea of giving people a proper understanding of what they're getting themselves into, and they might be able to point out from it, okay, that doesn't look like there's enough space for a wheelchair, or that light's very bright, or there's hard furnishings that might be very loud. Stuff like that. It's really important. Now, okay, I'm gonna keep moving a bit faster. All right, so I'm moving on to chronic illness, I think. Yes. So I'm going to quickly explain the images I have on the board. So the first one is a cartoon person looking very tired and low energy. And that's a key thing with chronic illness is that might be the only distinguishable thing, that people are just tired. And then below that I have a cartoon who looks very enthusiastic, very excited. And that's just to show that chronic illness is dynamic. It changes day to day a lot. And someone might be absolutely fine one day. The other thing I have is a packet of prescription medication. That is a key thing with chronic illness. If someone needs to have a small bag with them, maybe they need to carry their EpiPen with them, maybe they need to carry their I don't know, 2 p.m. medication. It's just a thing to be aware. People might have a little snack with them that they can take before or after the medication, or maybe they're diabetic and they're taking a snack for that. No need to judge people for eating a little bit. Obviously, if there's a room you're not allowed to eat something with, if you've encouraged people that they can move out in and out of the space, they know that they can move outside to eat something. The other thing I have is a spoon, and a spoon, I'll send you the theory around this, but you might hear chronically ill people and disabled people in general, but generally chronically ill people, say that they're running out of spoons. And what that means is tiredness. So spoons are made to represent energy. So it's used as an explanation of disability. And I want to just talk through a little bit to give people an understanding of how disability works. So it might be a case where everyone starts the day with 10 spoons, and those spoons represent your energy. But for you, um, getting your whole morning routine and getting into college might only take 1 spoon. For someone with a disability, brushing your teeth might take 1 spoon. Some people use it differently, as in like you start the day with 20 spoons and they start the day with 5. But the idea is that you have different amounts of energy, and how you conserve that is part of being disabled. So if you're talking to someone who's disabled and they say, oh my God, I can't go for coffee, I won't have the spoons to do my homework afterwards, that's what they're talking about. It's energy. So I'm going to talk quickly about some things to do with chronic illness now that hopefully we understand chronic illness a little bit better, but I understand this is running a mile with how fast I'm going. I'll share the checklist with you afterwards though, and you can check through everything. You can also rewatch the video that I've sent in the chat. So one thing is a HEPA filter, if you can get one. They do cost money. They cost about 100 quid, but it depends on the size of the space. They can be used for years as well, though. And what they do is they take particles out of the air. They became more common during COVID because it can reduce the likelihood of you getting COVID in a room, because I'm not sciencey, but it like takes the COVID out of the air. I'm sure science students are cringing at me right now, but the idea is a HEPA filter makes everyone less likely to get sick, but chronically ill people might be immunocompromised. So that might mean that if they get a virus, they might react to it more seriously, or it might land them in hospital even. So it's really important to just be nervous about that kind of thing. And part of that then is, if your event, if it's suitable, masks might be an option. I know that we say that COVID is like gone, but it's not. COVID can be crippling for disabled people, but it can also leave people disabled. So masking up is very disability friendly. The other thing is just to open some windows. Very COVID, like remember the things you were doing in the depth of COVID, and try and do a few more of those things now, even if it's hand sanitizer or something. It's important that people are included in a way that makes them feel safe and respects their health. So I am so nearly finished. I'm going to move on to physical disability. This is probably what you think of most commonly when I say disability. So on the screen, we have a cartoon of a wheelchair, a prosthetic limb, crutches, and a walking stick, and the words physical disability, again with our logo in the corner. And I'll explain at the end what the Ability Co-op is, just to kind of show you about next steps. But yeah, so for physical disability, there's the obvious things. Wheelchair accessible. Can you not only get the wheelchair into the building, but are your chairs far apart for your aisle that a wheelchair could have space to go down the aisle? That's important. Another thing is, oh, I only learned this recently. I think this is fascinating, but having just a ramp is not accessible. And the reason why is some ramps are not accessible to people with walking sticks, and because they have like suction on the end, and then if you hold them at an angle you can't hold yourself up properly, so they need to be on flat ground. So having both a ramp and stairs is actually the most accessible option, and I think that's a great example of something that's like, something might seem accessible and then you go, oh my God, that's not accessible, because I thought I was like winning with my architectural ramp design, and then my friend was like, I can't use a ramp. I was like, excellent. So it is important And in that sense, also important, I'm going to remind you about having your anonymous form to request a reasonable accommodation, because there are just some things that we don't think of. And no one is expecting you to think of them. People are just expecting you to ask in a respectful way. And a lot of people would be more comfortable if that was anonymous. So it is important there. The other thing about physical disability is nothing too high. So if you can't reach it sitting down, it's not low enough. So if you have snacks on offer, drinks on offer, pamphlets on offer, and they're up high, people can't reach that. That's the case, obviously, for different types of disability, but the most obvious one is a wheelchair. And that's why I use the example of if you can't reach it sitting down, you could, like, it's not accessible. But different types of disability can impact that. So I'm going to talk briefly then about, so I've run through all of my notes. I'm going to talk briefly about the Ability Co-op. So we are a student-led disability advocacy group. We work closely with the disability service, kind of keeping them in check. So if you have any questions, you can email the disability service at askds@tcd.ie, but you can also email the Ability Co-op. So I'm going to put both of those emails in the chat. I'll actually do it now before I forget. And what you can do, say you want to talk through, all right, they're both in the chat there. So say you are planning an event and maybe it's a big one, maybe it's a small one, and you're wondering how can we make this more accessible, but you don't want to hold a full focus group, because that can be quite complicated. You can just shoot us an email. Just say, this is what we're thinking of doing. How would you recommend we make this accessible? So I hope I've given you ideas today on how to make your events accessible, but things change. Disabilities are dynamic. They change person to person, day to day, and it's important to kind of keep up to date. So if you're talking specifically with people who do attend your service or your event, and you're asking them what would make it easier for them, but if you're planning something and you don't know who's going to attend, if you want to talk to us, you're absolutely welcome to. Please remember that we are student volunteers, so anyone might take a couple of days to respond to, but yeah, we're really keen to make campus and Trinity as a community more accessible. So I'm just going to point out some of the cartoons on this slide. So this slide says general. It has a cartoon of a person with their arm around the back, so it's just to signify support. Then it has a cartoon of two people just engaging in communication, and then a cartoon where someone is smaller and someone is taller and they're on different size blocks so that they end up at the same height. And what I just want to talk about very, very briefly here, because I'm running out of time, but disability accommodations are not they're not extra, they're not like beyond, they're not like, oh, we're asking too much. It's just taking away as much as you can the impact that that disability is having and trying to give people equal access. It is not about special treatment and getting something extra. It's about being able to access it the same way everyone else can access it. Whether that be through captioning or whether it be through visual descriptions or whether it be through a ramp and stairs. So yeah, so does anyone have any questions before we wrap up? Where exactly can we? Yes, I'm going to thank you, Lillian. Okay, sorry, I'm pulling up my link. So we are currently revamping this, but this is the checklist of how to make your events accessible. I would prefer if you use the information that we gave you today because it's more advanced. Let me see then as well. Sorry. Aside from providing alternative text for technology is not my thing. Aside from social media. Yes, color contrast is great. So you might also, so we'll talk about this very, very briefly. If you notice on my slides, there is boxes behind the writing. It just highlights where the writing is. and that's important. The other thing is you'll notice that I have a really pale background and really dark words on it. Um, and that's just to make it easier to read. The other thing is fonts. Um, fonts are complicated. Generally, if you can hold the phone further away from you, can you still read it? Is a good way to measure it. There are specific fonts that are accessible, but in general, it's best to just kind of eyeball it because it gets too complicated and we don't want to make these things complicated. The other thing though is caps lock. Absolutely not. Avoid caps lock at all costs. Um, it just makes everything more difficult. And then, as I mentioned before, for social media, if you're live streaming, to do it via YouTube instead of Instagram. And then for email communications, so one thing that you might do is you might have noticed when I said to not say something sarcastic, or if you do, to highlight that it is sarcasm. So if your emails are more informal, you might say something and then say sarcasm, or say something and then say joke. Um, you also might describe visuals that you put into, I think you actually mentioned that in the, yeah, okay. But yeah, I think that's what I can think of at the minute. There's a million different ways to do it, but hopefully that gives you an idea of how to um kind of progress with that. Does anyone have any other questions to run through? Um, thanks, Lillian. Lillian is also on committee for the Ability Co-op, so is hyping me up in the chat. No, all right then, Jack. Maybe I'll pass back over to you. But like I said, if anyone has any questions, you can email them to us at askds@tcd.ie or at abilitycoop@gmail.com.
Yeah, I guess thanks all to Kira. That's everything. You guys will all know what further trainings you're signed up to, so make sure you show up. And best of luck to all societies for Freshers Week, and obviously come into the office if you have any questions at any point. And you can use the resources that they've pointed out if you have any questions for the co-op. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you.